Stop what you are doing. Ripple just handed the Bitcoin crowd a literal skull. And no, this isn't some sort of Halloween kind of marketing stunt. I'm talking about the infamous skull of Satoshi, a piece of protest art now reborn as crypto's most unexpected peace offering. So picture this. You walk into the buzzing expo hall at the 2025 Bitcoin conference in Las Vegas. There's neon lights, hardware wallets everywhere, and the collective hum of miners doing what they do best. And right in the middle of all of this is the glossy, ominous sculpture of a human skull wired up with blinking LED eyes. The placard says it's been permanently donated to the Bitcoin Museum in Nashville, and the donor? Ripple. Yeah, the very same Ripple whose community has been throwing elbows with Bitcoin maxis on social media since, well, forever. Now my draw, it hit the showroom floor harder than a leveraged long during a flash crash. And so that is when it hit me. Now, we might have just witnessed the crypto equivalent of the Berlin Wall coming down. This bizarre metallic skull symbolizing proof of work energy waste turning into a kind of handshake between two chains that could not agree on anything except maybe the price of pizza back when Lazio kind of did the infamous or famous order. Now, here is where the backstory really matters, because nothing in crypto is ever so simple. Now, the skull of Satoshi started life last year as a kind of provocative piece of art, a kind of critique aimed squarely at Bitcoin's energy-hungry mining algorithm. Artists and environmentalists kind of posed it outside conferences and permanent buildings, with protest signs that basically read, "Bitcoin is cooking the planet." Now, Bitcoiners rolled their eyes, pointed out how much electricity banks use, and the kind of shouting match kind of escalated from there. Now, you remember the memes, the green fists, red candles, and all caps. Fast forward to this week, and well, Ripple's team quietly reached out to the Bitcoin conference organizers and says, "Hey, we would like to give you the skull." Now, there's no leaked emails, there's no hyped tweets beforehand, they just did it, and the conference's official X account confirmed the drop like special guest at Bitcoin 2025, skull of Satoshi donated by Ripple. And you can cue 10,000 crypto influencers scrambling to hit records on their phones. Brad Garlinghouse, Ripple's famously unshy CEO, hops onto X a couple hours later to explain why his company just re-gifted a former insult. He says, and I'm paraphrasing here, "Look, this skull once symbolized criticism, but now it represents, I should say, Bitcoin's incredible staying power." In other words, the thing that people used to beat Bitcoin over the head with now kind of tips its hat to 16 years of the network refusing to die. Now, he kind of wrapped that up with a call for unity. Bitcoin, XRP, Solana, Dogecoin, you name it. Everyone, across the aisle, has more in common than they think. Financial inclusion, clear rules, relentless innovation, and those are the kind of shared quests, essentially. And honestly, that hit me harder than the neon lights, because tribal warfare in crypto's kind of weird guilty pleasure, if you will. Now, you can't scroll X for more than 10 seconds without seeing laser-eyed BTC maximalists yelling, "Have fun staying poor," at someone's with cartoon frog in their kind of profile picture. Or XRP holders firing back with "Enjoy the lawsuit losses." Now, we kind of pretend that it's just good fun, but every nasty thread and every unfounded rumor bleeds into public perception. Regulators screenshot this stuff, and your uncle, who still thinks Bitcoin is a literal coin buried in his backyard, still sees that drama and decides to keep his money in a dusty savings account. Just remember January's kind of slap fight, right? You had Perry Rothschild from the Riot kind of platforms declare that Ripple was single-handedly preventing the United States from building a strategic Bitcoin reserve because the company didn't want Uncle Sam stacking sats. Now, Brad shot back that Ripple supports a multi-coin reserve, Bitcoin, XRP, maybe even some Ethereum, and whatever gives the treasury diversified exposure. But did anyone notice the nuance? Of course not. We were all just too busy retweeting the spicy kind of takedowns and farming engagement. So to see Ripple kind of flip an artifact of conflict into a literal museum piece is kind of like watching Thor hand Mjolnir to Loki and saying, "We're actually brothers. Let's go save the universe." It's kind of part spectacular and part maturity, and mostly, a reminder that even sworn rivals, eventually realize the real boss fight is outside of the arena. Now, I know what you might be thinking. It's a cool story, but why should I really care? And here is why. Markets move on narratives long before fundamentals. So if the kind of dominant story in 2025 is that crypto tribes bury the hatchets, well, policymakers in Washington, Brussels, and Abu Dhabi, suddenly have fewer headlines justifying knee-jerk crackdowns, right? Portfolio managers who still kind of lump Bitcoin in with, beanie babies might give your favorite altcoin a bit of a second look. Venture capitalists, they have been, sitting on the sidelines since the last rate hike, could start maybe flowing in again. And that means liquidity, baby. That's the sweet, sweet liquidity. Plus, there's a kind of direct wallet impact here. Every time a maxi war erupts, liquidity leaves the room. So picture two halves of the same stadium lobbing chairs over a divided fence. Meanwhile, of course, the ticket vendors stop selling hot dogs because no one wants to navigate the chaos. Now, unity means that the fence comes down, trades kind of flow and fees drop, and yes, oddly, shaped kind of art can, in fact, moon too. Now, speaking of trading, if you want to act on these narrative swings instead of just doom scrolling them, you're going to check out Blowfin via the link that's in the description down below. It's the up-and-coming crypto exchange that's basically combining a slick interface that you would expect with the advanced tools that most platforms hide behind VIP badges. Now, I've been poking around on their order books for the last few weeks. Liquidity feels surprisingly deep, and staking yields don't look like someone kind of smashed that zero key. So yeah, grab an account, grab the bonus, and start riding with the peace of mind and kind of peace dividend waves, if you will. Okay, so the little mini rant is over then. Let's zoom back to the skull itself, because I actually got a close-up look thanks to a friend live streaming the exhibit. Now, under the LED eyes, there's a little engraving, proof of work, proof of worth. Now, that slogan alone could melt an entire kind of subreddit, but it captures the pivot, right? What used to be a critique about energy now kind of reframes as a celebration of resilience. Bitcoin hasn't been hacked, hasn't been shut down, and is basically the cockroach of finance, right? The skull just immortalizes that stubborn survival instinct in polished aluminum. Now, Garninghouse's speech dug even deeper. Now, he talked about how his earliest days in tech were at dial-up speed. I mean, who remembers that? I do. Now, when, of course, people argue over whether email was needed or needed even a fax mode, to look legitimate to regulators. It sound familiar to anyone else? Because it does to me. Now, he reminded everyone that the internet won because open protocols eventually cooperated. Web browsers stopped declaring war. HTML standard came out, and suddenly you could, build Amazon instead of a kind of flame war forums. Now, Garninghouse's point here is that crypto is that awkward 1997 stage. Either we start aligning on shared goals, or we spend another decade side questing ourselves into, well, irrelevance. And look, right, I'm not naive. Ripple and Bitcoin still have philosophical kind of differences, right? One values on-chain neutrality above everything else. The other optimizes for settlement volatility and enterprise integration. right? That's okay. Rival pizza shops can, of course, fight about thick crust versus thin crust, but still agree that Domino's app tracking, revolutionized delivery, right? And you don't have to sacrifice identity to play on the same field. So let me ground this in with something tangible then, carbon emissions. Now, the proof of work versus proof of stake debate gets pretty heated. There's no pun intended there either, right? But after years of yelling, we finally saw big mining firms pivot towards standard hydro in Latin America and kind of flared gas in Texas, right? Meanwhile, of course, proof of stake networks like Solana suffered their own headline outages and responded by improving validator incentives, right? Competition kind of plus dialogue equals progress. So if Ripple's skull stunt nudges miners and stakers into the same round table, well, that's a net win for the planet. So let's think about the regulatory clarity too, right? The SEC is currently juggling spot XRP ETF proposals, Bitcoin ETFs, and enough paperwork to, deforest a small country. Gary Gensler doesn't lose sleep over which chain is best, I'm sure, and he doesn't lose sleep over the industry's inability to present a unified front like, let's say, the banking lobby. And it's great to see him finally leaving the SEC. Now, when Bitcoin and XRP leaders share a stage and a weird piece of modern art, well, you're basically sending a kind of Congress a handwritten note that says, you can regulate us like commodities. You can regulate us like payment processors. Just please pick a lane so that we can innovate in it. And if you want to nerd out about the numbers, here's a quick lightning round. After the donation announcement, XRP saw a 4% uptick on its hourly chart, while Bitcoin held steady but showed a noticeable bump in options open interest, right? So, social media sentiment, it kind of trackers logged a 23% decrease in negative tweets, monitoring both coins simultaneously. Now, that's not moon math, but it is data backing up the vibe shift. Now, full disclosure, tribalism isn't going to vanish because Brad dropped a shiny skull into a display case. Now, we're going to be having to see maximalists quoting the white paper like scripture, and you'll probably end up still seeing Ripple critiques swear, the company is a centralized bank in disguise. And it's fine. Healthy kind of debate sharpens arguments. But maybe, and just maybe, the conversation tilts away from your coin is useless towards here's how our design choices serve different user bases. And that tiny kind of tweak actually unlocks collaborative grants, joint R&D, maybe even cross-chain liquidity pools that work without 3 layers of wrapped tokens. Now, at this point, you might be kind of itching to swap opinions with real humans instead of listening to me and my monologue. Well, it's perfect timing because you can jump into our free crypto Discord server. There's a link in the description down below. Now, we break down moves like this in real time. We share charts and yes, we keep the kind of skull memes coming. Now, it's the kind of chill corner of the internet where maxis and alt-season degenerates can argue without kind of, resorting to Viking emoji battles. And one last nugget before I let you all go. During Brad's chat, he kind of quoted Winston Churchill, because of course he did, saying that you will never reach your destination if you stop to throw stones at every dog that barks. Now that line kind of pinballed around the conference hall, right? People nodding, a few kind of rolling their eyes, but everyone kind of remembered it. And it kind of rings true for crypto, right? If we keep, wasting energy dunking on each other, we're basically sprinting on a treadmill. Lots of sweat, zero forward motion. But hitch those, treadmills together, and suddenly you've got a moving walkway to the future. So next time that somebody kind of flings shade at your favorite coin, maybe show them the skull selfie and ask, Are we really doing this again? Worst case, you spark a conversation. Best case, you save everyone a migraine and maybe a couple of percentage points in slippage. Talk about a win-win. All right, deep breath. We've covered art, alliances, price action, and museum selfies. So here's the quick recap pinched into a single inhale. Ripple took an anti-Bitcoin sculpture, donated it as a tribute. Brad Garninghouse begged the community to unite around inclusion, clarity, and innovation, and early metrics suggest that Peace Pipe is at least half smoked. Where that kind of smoke drifts next depends on whether we collectively choose cooperation or clapback.